All right, guys, welcome back to Falcon Central Radio, part of the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman. Today, as usual, joined by my co-host, Matt Karoly. We're going to be talking with Raekwon Gilbert, who we had on a couple of weeks before the draft to sort of preview what the Falcons will do. And of course, we're going to have Raekwon to come back with us and review what the Falcons are going to do on tonight's, or what the Falcons did, I'm sorry, on tonight's episode. We'll talk through all the picks. We'll talk through some of the UDFAs. We'll talk through and answer many of your mailbag questions. But we'll kick things off on tonight's episode, just as we usually do, to get through any roster news and sort of the two biggest roster news before we take the deep dive into the draft. Over the last week since we did a show was that the Falcons cut Brandon Fusco, the guard that they signed to in free agency last year, and was the starting right guard for the team through the first half of the 2018 season. And they also exercised the fifth-year option for Keanu ONeill, safety, their number one pick in 2016. So, Matt, start us off. Sort of, what were your thoughts when you saw that Brandon Fusco was cut?
Yeah, it was just kind of the inevitable. It's now become a crowded room on the interior offensive line, based on what they've done in free agency, based on their first overall pick being a guard, Chris Lindstrom. You kind of saw the writing was on the wall, and Brandon Fusco even did, which was kind of funny. He tweeted out right after that pick, kind of a GIF showing that he wasn't long for the Falcons anymore, and that appeared to be the case. And the Falcons let him go on Monday, and creating $2.3 million of cap space, which, again, I think it's mainly going to just be used for the draft fund. But there always is a chance that the Falcons dip their hand into free agency once again, and maybe add someone to the defensive line that they didn't add this past weekend. But yeah, kind of an expected move. I wish Brandon the best. It's kind of an unfortunate turn of events for him, getting hurt, and then kind of what the Falcons did this offseason. He was no longer needed anymore. So again, hopefully he lands on his feet somewhere with another team. And then I guess the other news, Keanu ONeill getting his fifth-year option exercise, much like Grady Jarrett signing his franchise tag, kind of, just a formality. And, you knew Keanu would be back, and hopefully he's back and better than ever coming off that ACL injury.
Yeah. So, Raekwon, tell me your thoughts on sort of seeing the news that Brandon Fusco was released.
I think it's kind of like how Matt said. It was writing on the wall after Christian Lindstrom was drafted the first round, and I think after Jomon Brown was kind of drafted, it was kind of a little shaky to imagine that they would be putting him out. Not to say that I wouldn't expect him to find some type of starting role in the future, whether it's be a tackle or a guard, but I don't think they was expecting him to start the first year. And James Carpenter, we know they tried to get him, I think, a few years ago during free agency, and they missed out on him. So I think they definitely view him as a starter. But once you draft another guy, and they always had heated up conversation, we started kind of get a little confused when they wouldn't put much attention on the defensive end and defensive tackle much as they were studying on the interior offensive line. So I think it was kind of writing on the wall, and it was coming anyway. So like Matt said, I think he hopes he finds another spot on, but I think he's done. He was pretty much done in Atlanta after that.
Yeah, I thought, Fusco going into training camp was a guy that wasn't necessarily safe in terms of his roster spot. Prior to the draft, I would have been like, yeah, he's probably going to make the team, but he's not necessarily 100% a lock in the sense of some other guys like Brown and Carpenter and potentially Schweitzer. But then once they picked Lindstrom, it was pretty much the nail in the coffin that the Falcons were going to move on from, Brandon Fusco. With the Neal pickup, the fifth-year option, I think that, Matt's right. It is pretty much a formality at this point. But I'm sort of curious what you guys sort of think, or what are you expecting with Neal playing on this fifth-year option? Or not yet. Technically, he won't play on it until 2020. But what are you guys expecting for Keanu ONeill to have sort of as a bounce-back season in 2019?
I think more of the same, honestly. Again, I know he's coming off a serious knee injury. You never want to take ACLs lightly, but seeing the way Keanu's tackling the rehab and just knowing, the type of person and player he is. I know he wants to get back to that Pro Bowl self that he was in 2017. So, I'm expecting that. I think Keanu is one of the best safeties in the league. I think he's very underrated amongst the fan base as far as the many hats that he wears on this defense. And again, until I see evidence pointing to the contrary, I'm going to assume that he's going to get back to that spot.
Raekwon, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think all of us kind of want to assume that him just getting right back on the same spot, which I feel like he will get to eventually. But I think it starts off a little slow, of course, in training camp. We see probably a lot of days where he'll probably be off on the side and take it a little easy coming in. But I don't expect him to be no less than what he was and what he did in the beginning. I hope he just takes it safely. I don't expect him to have too many snaps in preseason besides maybe the first, third, and last game, but. Pretty much the same y'all expect from every year, Pro Bowl caliber safety. Just have to stay. We hope this doesn't become a continuous thing where he gets hurt every year, but I doubt that, and I just hope he just stay healthy for the future.
I agree. So let's talk about the thing that everybody's here to hear us talk about, and that's of course, the Falcons 2019 draft class. We'll go through each pick and give our thoughts on each pick and sort of the various things surrounding each pick and our expectations for everybody that the Falcons drafted. Of course, we have to start things off with the Falcons' first round pick in Chris Lindstrom, who they took out of Boston College, the offensive guard, took with that 14th pick. We heard a lot of talk about the Falcons potentially trying to move up for an Ed Oliver, potentially trying to move up for other players, but eventually they sort of settled in at pick 14. This was a conversation we had 2 weeks ago with Raekwon and, of course, with Matt when we were talking about sort of what the safest bet probably was, given all the rumors that the Falcons would probably stay at 14 and take the best offensive lineman. But I think a lot of us sort of expected that to be maybe Cody Ford or Jonah Williams or somebody else. And so when Chris Lindstrom's name sort of came across the runner, I'm curious, what were your guys' thoughts? I know, Raekwon, you can sort of take the floor and take a bow a little bit in terms of predicting it. So we'll start off with you.
Like I said, like we talked about before, I think if they were to stay, because I think moving into the top 10, like Thomas Mitrov said before, it was kind of a hefty price. And I knew that if they were going to move into the top 10, we say it now that his offensive line has always been the primary thing, but move in, you have to get an impact player. I think probably would have been Ed Oliver, but maybe they've been comfortable enough with the defensive line as it is now, as they've shown. But I think Lindstrom was probably the safest. He was the best interior offensive lineman besides Garrett Bradbury out of North Carolina State. And I don't think they're moving into center, taking Alex Matt replacement that early would come right now. So I think I can step back and say right now, man, even after when they evaluated Cody Ford in Oklahoma, out of Oklahoma, I think they evaluated more as a guard and tackle, and then they kind of figured out that he was the better man, and Juwan Taylor had knee problems, so you see why he felt the way he did. And Titus Howard, I didn't think he was going to step in and play either guard or tackle the first day, and he was still a day 2 option, but the Texans pulled the trigger on him. So I think the Falcons did the best move by taking the safest option, the best option, not just that too.
Yeah, if they, it seemed like their philosophy was they wanted to take one of the best offensive linemen on their board. And, I think that might have been Jonah Williams. Jonah Williams went to 11 to the Cincinnati Bengals. And at that point, it seemed like Chris Lindstrom was the next guy in line because of what Raekwon was saying there. As far as Cody Ford, they viewed him more as a guard. The reports were out there the week prior, and it seemed like they were confirmed with the Lindstrom pick. Jawan Taylor, Raekwon mentioned the medical issues. I think he was off their board because of those things. And then a guy like Dalton Reisner, too, who I think deserved to be in the discussion. I think they probably viewed him the same way they viewed Ford as a guard. So with that all being said, Chris Lindstrom would have vaulted to the top of that list because he was, the best guard arguably in the draft and a plug and play option. Whereas the other guys, there's more projection to be done with Reisner and Ford at guard, even though Ford did have some experience at Oklahoma at guard. So I think they wanted the best offensive lineman. They got it at 14. And then, as we'll talk about a little bit, then they wanted to get out and get their tackle, and they traded up for Caleb McGarry to do that. So, the way I'm looking at this draft class is they had 3 objectives in mind: improve the offensive line, improve the defensive line, and fortify the depth and the cornerback room. And I think they did two of the three things. It was tough if they went offensive line, which is something we were talking about the last several shows. If they went offensive line with their first pick, it was going to be tough based on the class to really address the defensive line and get an impact player there. If they wanted to address the defensive line, they needed to do it with their first round pick, and they opted to protect Matt Ryan. And you can't argue with that philosophy. I mean, Matt Ryan's the franchise player. If you want him playing until he's almost 40 years old, the key to do that is to invest in the offensive line, which they haven't done in quite some time. So again, you can't fault their strategy. They got some of the best guys that were on their board at the offensive line. And again, getting two of their three weaknesses fixed, I think is, a job well done.
I'm curious, Matt, to get your thoughts sort of now that we have the value of hindsight. A lot of talk in the month of April leading up to the draft was that the Falcons going out and signing guys like Adrian Claiborne and Tyler Davidson and Rashid Hageman wasn't going to affect their draft plans in a major way because, a lot of people thought the team was still going to invest in the defensive tackle. And again, we heard rumors right up until draft night that that's really where the direction the Falcons were going to go. So I'm curious to get your thoughts and as well as Raekwon's thoughts as sort of now looking back at the hindsight, do you think the Falcons basically decided in April, okay, if the plan is to get an offensive lineman in round one, then we do definitely need to try to shore up this defensive line and get some veteran pieces in here?
Yeah, I mean, I think you made a point, whether it was last week's show or the week before, the signings of Claiborne and Davison moved the needle more for the defensive line than the signings of Carpenter and Brown. So with that being said, yeah, I think they felt good about the defensive line based on those signings, and they still were unsure of the offensive line after the two signings they made with Carpenter and Brown. So I think that's why you heard, Blank and Dimitroff said they weren't done or they weren't settled at offensive line. And maybe we should have, read the tea leaves then that, they were going to go offensive line heavy early on, despite some of the rumors and smoke screens that were swirling. So yeah, I do think hindsight saying that they're very comfortable. Well, they're more comfortable with the defensive line than they were with the offensive line before last weekend. And they're going to roll with, Davison, Sanat, Jarrett, and Crawford as their top four interior guys. And then they have, we know what they've committed to Vic Beasley with his fifth-year option. He's going to be the one starter on one end on defensive end. And then, you got Tack McKinley entering his third season. You're expecting a big jump from him. And then, bringing in Claiborne as a veteran, as a rotational guy. And then, that fourth spot is probably a little up in the air. Right now, it would appear Steven Means is going to be that guy. But again, he showed some stuff that he deserves, a couple more opportunities along the defensive line in 2019. So, yeah, I do agree. I think that they were more comfortable with the defensive line than they were the offensive line. And that's why the picks were made the way they were.
Yeah, like Matt said, I think they were way more comfortable, especially when you have the improvement, seeing how Dejan Sanat kept on moving forward. I think he took, like we all know, he took most of the snaps as one technique moving in, but we still see that he took improvement when they signed Davison and also Claiborne. We kind of see him that they also put a lot more investment expectations with Vic Beasley and Grady Jarrett with his franchise tags and Tech, like you said, Matt, going into his third year and hitting that kind of that, not that peak moment, but just seeing what he can be and also for the next 3-4 years after. I think this is kind of years for everyone to kind of show like, okay, we're going to put all our chips in our defensive line. But I think everyone knew with offensive line coming in. I think maybe even like after around January, they knew the offensive line had to be improved because I don't think they were too quick to do it until the certain pieces fell into hand, especially when you come in to sign and see how free agency would come out and see who you'd be able to spend money on, who would be able to keep. I don't think they really were certain 100% onto it until after, like Matt said, when they signed Davison and Stephen. I keep saying Stephen. Adrian Claiborne. But also, I think they put a lot into Steven Means. He played real well against the run and came in good back in the half of the season. So I think they kind of a little more comfortable into who's playing what into the defensive line than the offensive line, especially now when you got two rookies. I think that with two talented rookies, I think that kind of gives a little bit more expectations. But I think right now they're more in the transition and actually putting the same expectation they put in the defensive line to offensive line. So we're going to have to see and see what it tells.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the Falcons' second first-round pick. I think a lot of people were expecting the Falcons potentially to sort of stay at 14 and then trade back into the first round and take a player. And I think a lot of people were expecting after the Lindstrom pick that would be potentially a defensive lineman, one of the top guys still left on the board. And that was not the case. The Falcons wound up taking offensive tackle out of Washington, Caleb McGarry, to further solidify the offensive line. I'm curious to sort of get your thoughts on whether or not there's been a lot of criticism, or probably a lot more criticism of this pick comparatively to the Lindstrom one. And it's a lot of people saying, I don't know if McGarry was worth it, trading up and giving up the third-round pick. I don't know if they could have waited. He was a guy that some people had, mid to late round grades on, and the Falcons reached on this. I'm curious sort of where you guys sort of stand on this. And, Matt, where are your thoughts?
So the way I look at it is, as far as defensive line was concerned, the value just didn't match up for a guy to trade up for. At that point, Jerry Tillery was off the board at 28 to the Chargers. Montez Sweat, I think, went a pick before to the Washington Redskins. And it is, I am kind of curious whether they had any interest in maybe trading up for him, and Washington beat him to it. And then at that point, they turned their attention to offensive line. But, there were no defensive linemen at that point that were worth trading up for. So again, they had to turn their attention to offensive line. Some of the things we said previously, Cody Ford, hindsight told us they viewed him as a guard. I'm willing to bet the medicals scared them away on Jawan Taylor, and then also Dalton Reisner they viewed as a guard. And then another name that they were connected to a lot was Titus Howard. Titus Howard was off the board at 23. So at that point, they're getting their top-rated tackle in Caleb McGarry, and who knows, maybe he was their second-ranked tackle behind like a Jonah Williams. So for me, that's why I'm feeling good about this. That's why I think the fans should feel good about this move, is they got arguably their second best tackle at pick 31. They got the best guard in the draft in Chris Lindstrom, who, is a plug-and-play, Pro Bowl potential type player. So they really went out and got some of the best offensive linemen this draft had to offer at the positions that they were hurting, which was right tackle and interior offensive line. So that's kind of how I viewed the Caleb McGarry draft pick, and why I think it should be looked at favorably, among the fan base.
Yeah, I think the Texans kind of scrambled the Falcons' big board a little bit when they took Titus Howard in 20. I think it was 23rd. I think.
Yeah.
I think that kind of shook everything up and made them put a little bit forward. I think they were expecting him to drop a little bit more. Maybe they trade up a little bit ahead in the second round, but especially when you had like 4 teams ahead of them in the 45th pick. I think it was Jacksonville, Carolina, and Buffalo, and Denver all took offensive tackles or offensive linemen. So I don't think that everybody thinks that they just all of a sudden Caleb McGarry is their guy. No, I think they went through a process and they said, okay, well, it was kind of trading like swapping an unhealthy Ryan Schrader for a younger, healthier Ryan Schrader a little bit in the first round. He's not really too much. He's not really as bad as everyone thinks he is. I think they put a lot of criticism on him, especially in pass protection. But to me, I think he was the best tackle on the board, and I think you had to take that. It's either him or you want to go with Greg Little. And I don't think either one was right there as acceptable, especially at 45th. But there were a lot of other options I thought that were going to go. I thought that if they would move up, maybe they'd take a cornerback. There was Greedy Williams is still out there. Sean Bunting, I thought that was really interesting. Everybody was hyping up Sean Bunting for the first round. And I really thought, honestly, maybe that would be the pick that they moved up and get him in the first round. But ended up being tackled, and I think there was a little bit uneasy expectations for him coming in. But McGarry's a good guy. He comes in, he plays hard. But I think he's right, like I said, right around along with Ryan Schrader, and I expect him to come in, maybe have a little rough going, maybe a little bit, but expect to get a lot of snaps in the preseason and see if he can become a little bit future starter.
Yeah, this is something I've talked about before is, a lot of people talking about, McGarry would have been there at 45 or he would have been there later in the draft. I don't necessarily really buy that. I think the Falcons, sitting there at 45, like you guys said, once Titus Howard went off the board, it really sort of pushed guys up to a certain extent. And then you look at sort of teams drafting ahead of them at the top of round 2, teams that showed interest in Caleb McGarry in the pre-draft process. You had Arizona with that first pick in the round 2. You had Jacksonville a couple of picks later. They wound up taking Jawan Taylor. You had Buffalo, who showed a lot of interest in Caleb McGarry. They wound up taking Cody Ford a couple of picks later. So the idea that the Falcons could just sit there and patiently wait for Caleb McGarry to fall to them at pick 45, I don't necessarily really buy. It would have been it could have happened, but it would have been a gamble. And then all of a sudden, if he would have gone to one of those three teams, two of whom actually did take offensive tackles, then you would have been, stuck in a situation where, the Falcons would have then truly been reaching on someone that they may not have necessarily viewed that highly. And, whether you agree with Caleb McGarry sort of being viewed as a top 50 pick, I think certainly there was a very strong probability that he was going to be a top 50 pick, whether or not the Falcons traded up for him or not. I do think, sort of like what Raekwon said, is I think he's been somewhat underrated to a certain extent. I certainly underrated him in the pre-draft process because I didn't really necessarily I watched him prior to the Senior Bowl, and they're like, yeah, he's okay, he's fine. And there was other tackles that I liked a lot more, and so he sort of got pushed to the back burner. But now, post draft, since I've actually done a little bit more digging on his film, I do feel like I'm not going to necessarily say that he's a first round talent or anything like that, but I do feel like I do feel a lot better about him. Whatever the grade I would wind up giving him, whether it's a late second round or an early third round pick, I still feel a lot better and feel like he's a solid piece in that range or whatever the case may be. So, you can describe it as maybe a little bit of a reach, but I think, again, as the board was sort of going in that direction, and with the Falcons really, essentially we always say, like, they didn't take the defensive lineman that they needed with that first pick. They took an interior guy, but they definitely needed to take an offensive tackle in this draft. And with the board sort of thinning out, you could make the strong case that, you take the offensive tackle early in the draft because that's a premium position, and you can still come back in, day 2, day 3, and still get help on the defensive line to bolster your rotation. And they kind of did that later in the fourth round. So, I think I like this pick probably a lot more than a lot of people did live. I think what's going to be interesting with these two picks is I think they're going to get on the field. I think the Falcons are going to get them on the field as quickly as possible. I do expect both of these guys to start week 1. To me, the question really is whether Chris Lindstrom is going to play on the left side or the right side. And I'm curious if you guys have a take on whether we'll see both of these guys starting right away this season, and sort of where you sort of project them to start at.
Yeah, I kind of want to hear Raekwon's answer first, because I noticed he mentioned he viewed Carpenter as the left guard starter going into the season, and then Lindstrom at the right guard. So, kind of give a little bit more on why you think that.
I just figured, since I think Lindstrom has played a little bit. He's played left guard and a little bit early in his career, but it's mostly been right guard. And those few games, I think it was like 7 to 8 games he played in 2017 at right tackle. So I just think it was just a right plug in right there, right guard. I think Carpenter, he can handle playing left guard. I think it's right. I
Sure.
think he's good enough dude to play with left guard. But I think definitely for Lindstrom stepping in right guard, just be fitting for him natural, and also for like Aaron said about McGarry, there's no other. I think besides anybody else on the team, I think there's no other obvious starter than McGarry, because it's either we deal with this or we go back to Ty Sambrello. And
Yeah.
I don't really know if anybody wants to deal with that anymore. So I'm just saying that's what we're going to put out there, and I got faith in it, man. I honestly believe, like Aaron said, McGarry wasn't going to drop any lower, and we're going to get the same value. That wasn't going to happen regardless.
No.
But when they traded up and take him, man, I mean, that's the guy we got to take with. And like you say, he's not as bad as everybody think he is, man. He's actually a good player, man. You just got to get him on the field, and I think for Dirk Curtis, they really just tooling up to get back on the run game really good. That's pretty much obvious to me when you go back to back running backs, but I guess we can get to that later.
Yeah. No, I love the attitude and physicality he's going to bring. You mentioned Ryan Schrader. I think that's a great player comp, but as far as a personality comp, I mean, the Lane Johnson vibes, they're there, and that type of nasty, like, he'll say whatever's on his mind type of thing. I love that he's going to bring that to the locker room. And yeah, I mean, I definitely think he's going to be Ty out for that right tackle spot. And then, I can get talked into, the two rookies starting on the right side, and then there's a battle for that left guard spot, whether it's Schweitzer, Carpenter, Brown. I think the money is kind of talking that, the Falcons hope it's Brown. And again, I'm probably more bullish on Jomon Brown than most Falcons fans. I think some of his better football is ahead of him. He did play some left guard. I think the last time was 2016. So, but he got all summer to make that conversion again after playing right guard the last 2 years. So, again, I can see a couple different scenarios, but I do think definitely Lindstrom and McGarry will be starting on opening day.
Yeah. I think, it's going to be interesting because I think the Falcons have the value of competition, particularly at those guard spots where they have now Lindstrom and 3 guys that have started games in the NFL. And so they can sort of, flip-flop these guys for a while and sort of see, who fits best. And, I think there is a concern a little bit that of potentially having 2 rookies starting side by side, which is one of the reasons that gives you a little bit of pause if Lindstrom stays at right guard and McGarry winds up being the starter at right tackle. But at the same time, I think it makes a lot of sense to be like, well, this is going to be the right side of our offensive line for the next decade, ideally. And why not, get that started now? And I think you guys nailed it with McGarry where, I think ultimately the deciding factor is just going to be that nastiness in the run game. And just Sambrailo just doesn't bring that to the table. He, you can make an argument that maybe given his, experience that he may be a little bit more ahead of McGarry as far as a pass protector goes, but given how much focus Dan Quinn has put on, establishing the run and being more physical up front, McGarry fits that to a T. And you mentioned Lane Johnson. Don't sleep on Ryan Schrader's nastiness now. He got in like 6 fights during that Hard Knocks training camp season. So, he's got a little nasty in him too. So I think that's really what we're hoping for to get sort of, I don't think we're going to get peak Ryan Schrader this year. But, down the road, I think, hoping McGarry can turn into sort of what Schrader was in 2016 and some of those, best seasons that he wound up having, I think is something that is achievable. So let's turn our attention to the next few days of the draft. I'm curious to get your thoughts before we jumped into the Falcons' day 3 picks. Were you sort of sitting there Friday night on day 2 of the draft, expecting and hoping and praying that the Falcons were going to trade back into round 3 to get the player of your dreams?
Raekwon, I'll let you go.
Expectations for Thomas Dimitroff are always kind of teeter because in your mind you always think, well, he's pretty level-headed. He's a pretty level-headed guy. Falcons, they don't make too many moves unless they know they're gonna get the right guy. Then it comes in the back of your mind that, well, maybe they're just gonna sit and just wait it out. If anybody falls, anybody that they really like moves up, maybe they move into the 3rd round. Then later on, I think when it got around probably mid-3rd round, I just kind of felt that they was gonna move up and take Draymond Jones, but I think he slid the Chargers, I believe. I think second though, I think I was, but I just kind of knew it right then. I kind of gave up on it. I think they was going to sit, especially when how many they had 7 picks in the day 3. So knowing how they like to move, especially in the day 3 of the draft, and grab the guys they kind of left over and see how it shakes out. I kind of knew how Thomas Dimitroff was going to sit, especially with Dan Quinn getting his guys. Obviously, they did because they didn't get too many that we expected, but they got the right guys that they wanted. So that's all that matters.
Yeah, I mean, I said when we were on the live show, Aaron, on Saturday, I was surprised that he didn't make a move just because of his nature to do so. But, seeing how the board went, a lot of receivers, a lot of, safeties, some cornerbacks that they could have used, they were going off the board. But I still felt like the board was kind of falling into place the way they wanted it to. There was a lot of, good players that they had targeted in the pre-draft process. Still on the board, like Max Crosby, Isaiah Johnson, all those guys. So, it made sense then that the value wasn't quite there. Now, if Chase Winovich did fall any further than he did, I that would have been the name I would have probably started pounding the table for if he had made it into the 90s. But that wasn't the case. He had gone somewhere in the 70s to the Patriots. So once that was off the table, it made sense for him to keep the picks and then to kind of do the wheeling and dealing on day 3.
It was kind of a reports about sorry, cut you off. There's a lot of reports. I think there was about Quincy Williams, Quincy Williams.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah,
I was gonna move up to the end, but I think he got taken by Jacksonville at the end of the 3rd. But besides that, that was like the only little radar we got from day 2.
Well, I was going to say that I heard that around that range where Draymond Jones went, is around where the Falcons were trying to trade up, and Jones with number 71 to the Broncos. And I heard that, they were trying to get up in that early portion, but they couldn't get a deal done with some of those teams. And maybe it was Draymond Jones, maybe it was Chase Winovich who went 77. And then we heard the reports the following day that, the Falcons were thinking about taking Quincy Williams, who went, 98 to the Jaguars. So, various things suggest that the Falcons tried several times to try to move up to get a player. We can speculate endlessly who that player would have been. Maybe it was Michael Dieter. Maybe they want to go for the trifecta on the offensive line. But it's one of those things where, I think they tried to do what everybody wanted them to do. It just didn't work out. And that's one of the things about the draft that's always interesting, is because we only find out what the teams tell us and ultimately what the picks are. But there's so many things going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of. And with these players, there's so many things behind the scenes. Like, you saw so many guys drop in this draft that people were like, that's a first round pick, that's a second round pick. Some of those guys went undrafted and whatnot. And there's so many things that teams are aware of that we're not aware of. And sort of we're just sitting there scratching our heads like, why is Chauncey Gardner-Johnson still going? Why is Jawan Taylor falling? Why is, Hakeem Butler falling? Et cetera, et cetera. Why is Kelvin Harmon? Just to name a couple of guys. And it's like, we don't know. And then we find out after the draft, oh, this guy had an injury issue. Oh, this guy had some character red flags. Oh, this guy had, something going on in his personal life or something like that. And so, I think it's easy for us to, to sit there frustrated and be like, oh, Dimitroff is screwing up this team. And it's like, well, he's probably behind the scenes doing everything he can to try to get these guys, and it just didn't necessarily work out for the team. And so, one thing that did work out for the team is they were able to move up in round 4 2 times. The first time they jumped up, 6 spots, I think it was, to get Kendall Sheffield, the cornerback out of Ohio State. And then later in the 4th round, they jumped up 2 spots to get John Kaminsky, the defensive end out of the University of Charleston. Let's start with Kendall Sheffield. And I'm curious, Raekwon, what are your thoughts on what Sheffield is going to bring to the table, and you think he's a guy that could immediately challenge potentially for that nickel cornerback spot?
I think Sheffield was kind of like the same model, the corner speed guy they wanted. I think it was the last year when they wanted Dante Jackson. We kind of heard a lot of rumors with him. He went to Carolina, but I don't think immediately, because right now, hey man, when you got as many interceptions as he has, man, you gotta get him on the field some way, some can. But there's a lot of ways you can get him on him, especially with 6 DB sets. A lot of the Falcons try to move with a lot. You get a lot in much of speed as you can on the defense. But honestly, he wasn't the guy that I expected them to get. I thought Isaiah Johnson was there, and I thought that they were going to pull the trigger on him. But when you reportedly run a 4.26, and I looked over at his film. I watched over from Maryland to Washington and Ohio, and I think it was Indiana from 2017. And I pretty much came away. I understood why they took him. He's very heady, aggressive. Clicking close space. Type of guy they like, especially with guys like when they came off a true front offer. You kind of lose those guys, lose a little speed. And you can't have a true front following everybody, the number one receiver, everyone. So I feel like you got to add a little more speed to the defense, and that's never bad. So especially on the corner when you need a need. So I feel like it wasn't the pick that no one expected again at corner, because I feel like he kind of dropped through the injuries. But he was another guy I feel like when it's all settled, okay, I understand, and I liked it. So I don't think he pushes for the nickel spot immediately, but he is a good value to have right there as your 4th corner.
Yeah, I agree with Raekwon. I don't think he's going to really test KZ in 2019 for that nickel spot. With these 2 picks, the Sheffield and Kaminsky, I think they're more for the future. I think, Dan Quinn saw 2 very toolsy players that fit his mold for, each respective position. Where, corner, Sheffield's a long, fast guy. I mean, when you run 4.2s, you can't find many corners like that in the draft. So, again, I see why that these were the selections, but I don't think they're necessarily going to have, that impact that, we've expected from some day 3 picks in the past. I think, again, Sheffield's mainly going to be used on special teams as a gunner, and we don't really want to see it come into him playing significant time, in my opinion. I think he is a little unrefined, with his back to the ball, in the press technique. I think he does have a little bit to go before he can really, contend and maybe, supplant Trufant for his spot in 2020 and beyond. And then, just kind of going into Kaminsky's selection, I think, again, this one was interesting because to me, the reports are that they were, heavily involved with Zach Allen when they went to that BC visit and worked him out. And I think he was probably, one of their priorities on the defensive line if they did have a day 3 or a round 3 pick. And he's kind of that similar prototype, but yet he's, ready to play, NFL ready right now. Whereas Kaminsky, I think, is a year and could be potentially 2 years away. I mean, for me, best case scenario is he's the Crawford replacement in 2020 when Jack becomes a free agent. I think his roster spot's safe because he's a 4th round pick that they went up and got, but I'll be really shocked if he sees time on the field in 2019. I know, Aaron, you have different thoughts, and I'm curious to see why. But for me, the 4th round picks were more for the future and not necessarily for the present.
Yeah, look, I think I agree with that. But I like the Sheffield pick. And, part of it is because I really felt that the Falcons needed a fast corner to deal with some of the fast receivers that they're going to face. Like Will Fuller, I know he's coming off an injury play year, but he scares the bejesus out of me because, like, all your attention goes to DeAndre Hopkins, and then Will Fuller just runs past everybody and scores a 60-yard touchdown. Deshaun Watson's going to do that on you. And so having a guy that can run with him, having a guy that can run with the Ted Gins, having a guy that can run with the Brandon Cooks, et cetera, the T.Y. Hiltons, I think is really valuable for this team. And, I've heard a lot of people talk about, Sheffield's raw and whatnot. And I'm watching him and I'm like, yeah, he's not perfect. He's not flawless or anything like that. But I feel like his rawness is being exaggerated. Now, let me preface this by saying, like, historically speaking, cornerbacks are the position I have the least amount of success with evaluating. So I could be completely wrong about this. And we could watch him just get torched all summer and throughout the season. But, I think he's going to give up plays. Don't get me wrong. I don't think he's going to come in right away and shut down guys. But I feel a lot better about his transition to the league than I felt about Jalen Collins. I don't feel like it's as good as maybe Isaiah Oliver, but I feel like he's going to be able to come in and contribute something this year. And whether that's in dime defenses, where the Falcons go with 6 DBs, whether that's, subbing out against certain matchups, like against the Saints, if the Falcons want to decide that, hey, maybe we want to put Desmond Trufant in the slot that week because Michael Thomas plays so much in the slot, and let's get a guy like Sheffield out there against a Ted Ginn or against a Traquan Smith. Makes perfect sense to me. And giving him some of those reps, not to say that he's going to play more than Casey in those matchups, but just getting him in the lineup to sort of deal with some of the speed that some of these teams can present, I think makes a lot of sense for the team. So I like him. I think he's going to contribute this year. I don't necessarily expect him to be a guy that's going to, most weeks he'll probably just be a special teams guy, as you said, Matt. But I do think there are going to be games where he's going to be a valuable piece for this Falcons defense. With Kaminsky, I agree 100% with you. I think it's going to take him some time to really make an impact, but I do expect him to play just because I think the back end of the Falcons defensive line rotation, while I think there are better players, I just don't think the Falcons are necessarily committed to those players. So I think they're going to give Kaminsky opportunities, potentially in the base defense at that strong side defensive end spot. And I think he'll play. The question is he going to play more than, say, a Crawford or a Means or a Hageman or, whoever else you want to put at that position? I think he'll be part of the rotation. I think he'll be active on game days. To me, the real question is, I think he'll play probably 10, 15 snaps. Maybe some weeks he'll play 20, 25 snaps. The question is going to be whether or not what he does with those snaps. And right now, I'm not expecting him to do a whole lot. I just think he's kind of a guy that they're just going to have out there and just say, you know what? Let's get him some development. Let's see what he can do. Let's give him some snaps and let's work with him. But the player that he reminds me a lot of is kind of like Rashid Hageman. He's kind of a one-note bull rusher. But the problem is he doesn't have Hageman's power. So his bull rush is not really effective. So I think it's going to lead to some issues this season when he does get those opportunities to play. So I'm not really expecting Kaminsky to do much when he does play, but I do expect him to play this year.
I mean, how many D linemen are you expecting to be active on game days? Because you're throwing out Hageman's name in there, and I think Hageman's going to be competing for a roster spot, let alone a spot on game days. To me, I think the top 4 are locked in place. Jarrett, Crawford, Davison, Sanat. And then typically you have 4 defensive ends. I mean, they might go 9 on game days, but to me, I think that'll be rare. And that's why I think Means is more ready, obviously, to get that like last spot. I mean, Claiborne Vic and Tacker locked in. So I just don't see room based on the numbers game for Kaminsky really to see those snaps that you're referring to.
Right now, I feel like they're going to go with 9 on game days most weeks, just to give Kaminsky some opportunities.
And then the 4 cornerbacks, I guess, like who usually you have to take from one of the positions.
I haven't thought of it through, Matt, to be honest with you. So I'd have to do some numbers in my head.
Yeah,
but
no, that's what I'm saying. I just don't see a spot based on that.
I think they'll figure out a way to make it work. We could probably take somebody away from the active roster somewhere to make it work. But that's where I'm leaning right now.
All right.
Still, though, I still think for the 4th round, I think they still talk about what Dallas was moving up to take him. I think.
Yeah, no, that's exactly why it made sense. Is because
I think that's why it makes sense. But really, to me, it's really just how much time are you willing to put into it, and how much are you willing to get back from it.
Yep.
Kaminsky, not saying there's not much there, but when you're D2 All-American and you have a lot of accolades, I mean, I think he had like 48 or 49 tackle for loss in like 40 games or something. So honestly, there's some talent there that's been told. But I think when he went to the Senior Bowl, I think he kind of splattered out. Didn't really turn out well. He didn't have the Senior Bowl everybody expected him to, but still, I feel like Atlanta. Well, we all know that Dan Quinn, Thomas Demetriou right now are going for the best athletes at every position. And I feel like right now that's one of the developments. So I don't expect Kaminsky to be active at all most of throughout the kind of like it depends on who turns out most on training camp. I honestly I'm on the Rashid Hageman train, but I want him to get back on. I honestly do because Rashid Hageman peak to me is exactly what they was looking for from Dexter Lawrence. Is exactly what they've been looking for back up in one technique for a while. And you don't get too many guys like that with his size. But still, I have my own expectations. I hold myself down. I know what to expect. I don't want to get overwhelmed, so I back off. But still, John, I don't think Kaminsky steps in right quick and gets a role unless he blows the hinges off doing training camp and also shows up maybe in preseason. If he fights off, worst come to worst, maybe he's gets on practice squad a lot, but. Right, I don't expect him to make too much of an impact just off, but I haven't really seen much of him. I think I really seen besides the Senior Bowl, I've seen one game, so he's kind of unknown.
There's not a lot of him out there. I mean, I think Aaron said there's one game on YouTube that he saw, and
he's the unknown to everybody.
Yeah, and then there's the clip of him at the Senior Bowl, which again, I'm with you. He didn't make an impact, kind of like the way Kalen Saunders did, coming from a small school as well. Kalen Saunders made an impact in the Senior Bowl, whereas Kaminsky didn't really do a whole lot. So, I think there's going to be a learning curve. That's why I think he's going to redshirt in 2019. And I do think his active or his 53-man roster spot's safe just because, again, they traded up for him. They made a commitment to him, and I don't think they want him getting poached on the practice squad. That's the worst case scenario in all this. So, again, best case scenario for me is he's the Jack Crawford replacement. I think they're building him up to be a similar player as far as using him inside and letting him fire off the ball in that B gap and making plays behind the line of scrimmage.
Yeah. To make it clear, I don't want anybody to take it that I think it's a bad pick. I think it's a good pick. I think, I just think he's going to take some time based off of the Senior Bowl, based off of the one-on-ones I saw, based off of the one game I saw that was, from his junior season. Just the same issues that seemed to show up in all of those instances where you just saw a guy that was trying to bully guys with strength, and he was able to do that in the Division II level. When you watch that game, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, this guy's good because he's just basically jacking up Division II guards. But then when he's facing, SEC Power 5 caliber guys in the Senior Bowl, it's just not that effective in the game the same way. And I just think a guy like him, the issue is that he just doesn't know how to use his hands. And that's why I compare to Hageman, because Hageman had some of the worst hands I'd ever seen from a guy coming from, a major conference coming into the league. And we saw it took the better part of 3 years. This was the same issue that we had with Jamal Anderson when we drafted him. It took him 3 years to really start to figure things out and being at least a consistent run defender and a guy that would occasionally get something going as a pass rusher, once in a blue moon. And I kind of think the same thing with Kaminsky. It's just going to take 3 years. But I think the Falcons are going to give him opportunities to play, as we've seen with some of those other guys that were early round picks. And, the question is going to be, what does he do with those opportunities? And right now, for me, like, he's probably the guy that has the lowest floor of anybody that we drafted, but that ceiling is really high. And I think when you balance those two things out, where the Falcons took him and why the Falcons took him, I think is completely justified. I just think, people just need to be patient with him, as they may or may not have been with some of the other recent Falcons picks.
And look, too, we're talking about the 135th pick in the draft. We're not talking about a round one selection like Jamal Anderson or a top 50 pick like Hagman. So, again, they gave up a 7th round pick to move up 2 spots for him. That's not a lot. So, again, yeah, they can be patient, and we're not talking about, bad value here. This is great value. This is what you're supposed to do on day 3, is take athletes that have super high potentials and, see if the coaching can get that out of them.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Falcons' last 3 picks with Quadri Olison, the running back out of Pitt, Hail to Pitt, the cornerback Jordan Miller out of Washington, and Marcus Green, the return specialist out of University of Louisiana at Monroe. So the Olison pick, I know, Matt, you have some thoughts on the Falcons taking a running back. We'll hold you there because I know you got some takes for that. Let's get Raekwon's assessment of the Falcons taking Olison out of Pitt.
Let me start by saying I really like Quadri Olson as a running back. Our day 3 value is really good for him. Him in Atlanta was really – it was one of those things where it was like, have you ever got a present and you don't really like it, but you have to enjoy it. You have to just enjoy it just for the sake of it.
I don't want to enjoy it, Raekwon. I don't want to.
You have to enjoy it for the sake, because you like it. He's a good player.
No, he is. I agree. I went back and watched him. He's a quality player. Quality player.
There were other great players there. There were other great players.
Yeah, that's the thing.
We will always be reminded with the Falcons that there's always other great players there. So, I mean, Quadri Olson, I think, honestly, though, he is a great player, though. I think he did come, like, Aaron, I think you mentioned it earlier this week, Pitt, coming from, they didn't really have much this year. He was really all they had, and he came, like you said, Aaron, he came from a one back where he had a 4-back most of the time, leading back, was pretty much open the hole. But he had some games, of course, like, I think it was I seen the Penn State game and his Clemson games where he pretty much really showed out, but there was some games where he kind of disappeared a little bit. But he's a big guy that got some top end speed a little bit, and when he gets off on the burner, so hopefully I don't really envision him as a power back and fully to the T of it, but I do think he's a great back for that value, and he steps in and he want to be, if he is the third row running back coming in behind Ito Smith, then that's great, awesome, but there were other great players there. That's what we will always be reminded about that. But I am appreciative about Quadri Olison, and I do like the pick. I would say that. I ended off with that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with me, it's just how many straight years are we going to address a position that is a replaceable position in favor of front 7 talent? Because, last year I wrote an article – when they picked Ito Smith when they did in the 4th round. And I was like, the 2017 or 2018 draft, Ito Smith is going to have a lot to say about the success or failure of that draft, because I thought, again, this team needs trench help, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And they opted in favor of going for a running back when, they had arguably the best backfield in football in Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman. And I know, when you're drafting, especially when you're drafting on day 3, you're looking at the future. And the Ito Smith move, was a precursor to Tevin Coleman leaving in free agency. But now, even more so in 2019, it's like, what does this say about, the future? Because, in my head, I was getting, bad thoughts about Devontae Freeman's health and whatnot. And, Brian Hill showed out, in my opinion, towards the end of the season. I mean, I want to see more of him. I want to see that Brian Hill that we saw in that Carolina game in week 16. And when I went back and watched Quadri Olison, I get a little bit of vibes from Brian Hill, and Brian Hill can do some of the same things that they're saying about Quadri Olison. And the only thing you can really say, I guess, is Brian Hill hasn't shown the ability to really get on the field in special teams. And I think Olison can do that as the personal protector on the punt team and all that. So, but for that to be the only reason that you're going to take, what's amounting to your 4th or 5th running back now on your depth chart for special teams reasons, again, that's not a good enough reason, in my opinion. And, Raekwon said it. I mean, there was other players on the board that that had better value that, like Blake Cashman or Justin Hollins would kind of have been a fun aspect to have him, kind of helping in your nickel edge rush, but also can, be a backup to Devondre Campbell, maybe the future replacement of Devondre Campbell. So again, running back was like one of the least needs going into the draft for me, and to address it even with 2 picks, perhaps with Marcus Green being listed as a running back, I just don't get it.
And it was also kind of weird because it was weird. Mostly, Falcons are pretty much pure athlete base wise, but he didn't. I mean, he didn't test out amazing. I mean, not saying he didn't test good, but it wasn't anything where you expect like, okay, well, this would probably put them over the edge for him or anything like that. Not saying he's not a great athlete, but it just was out of the blue. That's the only thing really.
And again, they talked about him being the power back that they were looking for, but for me, I think they're taking this aspect of being physical and then bringing a power run game a little bit too far, if you ask me.
Yeah, look, I express the same sentiments. As a Pitt guy, I like Quadriolus, he's been a great player for Pitt. I just never watched him really, certainly in the last couple of years, and said, oh, that guy's going to be a difference maker as a running back at the NFL level. Like, he always looked to me like he could be a third running back. He could be a practice squad type of guy, a guy that can contribute on special teams. And ultimately, I think that's really what this is. I think ultimately you can say this is the Falcons doing over the Brian Hill pick when they drafted Brian Hill in the 5th round 2 years ago, and he wound up getting cut early that season. And the main reason why he got cut was they were drafting him to compete with Teron Ward to be sort of the personal protector on the punt team, which Ward won the job. And basically it made Brian Hill extraneous to the roster, and they wound up cutting him. He wound up landing in Cincinnati, or they put him on the practice squad. Then he went to Cincinnati, and they brought him back this past season. And Olesen is not going to have that issue because that's what he did in college. And ultimately, while I think Olesen is perfectly capable of being a contributor to an offense, I just think sort of ultimately what the Falcons did is kind of similar to the Russell Gage pick, where they took a guy that primarily is going to play special teams, and he'll dabble on offense, and you'll see him every now and then on offense, and he'll make a play and have a nice run, and it'll be fine and wonderful, and you'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember Russell Gage. Oh, yeah, Claudio, listen, he's solid. But ultimately, this is a special teams pick in my eyes. I like Olsen. I'm going to root for him, obviously, because the Falcons never have pick guys on their team. So I'm going to root for him, even though I'm basically being, critical of the pick. And I hope he proves me wrong. But, I think ultimately the Falcons sort of went for a floor guy in terms of this guy's going to help us out in special teams, not necessarily really doing anything great at the running back position. I think there were better options in terms of guys that at least had a little bit more potential as running backs, as offensive weapons. And I think Olsen's fine, but again, I don't see a future where he's getting 8 to 12 carries a game. I don't see a future where the Falcons are basically it's 3rd and 1 or 2nd and 1, and the Falcons are like, oh no, we're taking Ito out of the game, we're taking Devontae out of the game, and we're putting Quadriolus in to be this sort of short yardage hammer. I just think that's a old way of playing football. Nobody does that in 2019. Nobody does that in 2018 in the NFL anymore. That's like a 2008. That's a 1998 style of football. And I don't see that, I hope the Falcons aren't trying to bring back, 1998 style football as if this was like, Madden and Olsen has a trucking power of like 97, which he doesn't have, but, it is what it is.
Mike Austin 2.0.
Doesn't Varner have the ability to be the personal protector or not?
He was more of a gunner on the outside.
Okay. What do you think this means for Varner's future? I know he's got that $50,000 bonus coming up May 15th. Do you think these signings, because when we were going into it, I think we kind of talked about this. We thought that he was an insurance policy in case they maybe didn't get a running back, but now that they got perhaps 2, what do you make of his roster spot?
Well, I think, the Falcons were definitely going in getting a return specialist. I think they got a return specialist. And I think, Varner and Green are going to go head to head. And whoever's the best return specialist is going to win the job. I think the Falcons will tip the scales in Green's favor, obviously, because he's a draft pick. And I expect Green to win the job just because I think Green's a little bit more explosive than Varner is.
Yeah. And
should be able to show that in preseason and in training camp. So I think Varner's probably not going to make the roster. I think there's a chance he could, though, just again because he does have some value in special teams, just again because Brian Hill's no longer a lock to make the team. I think the Falcons are going to wind up keeping 4 running backs, and I don't really count Marcus Green as a running back because he's just basically going to return kicks, and I think his best position is really as a slot receiver rather than a running back at this point. So, I think there's a chance that Varner could still wind up making the team, but he's definitely on the outside looking in, I think. So, do you guys have any thoughts on Marcus Green and Jordan Miller?
Let Raekwon go. He was the one that found him.
Jordan Miller he's not going to. I think because just off first initial film, he's not going to wow anybody from his speed or length or anything like that. But he's just one of those. He's a really good corner. I think he's really patient at the line of scrimmage when he is giving press. Because I know Washington likes to run a lot of cover 3 zone a lot, but when he is giving him press a lot, man, he's really patient, man, and he's got a little bit of back end speed. A lot of times when you think he'd be burned off, I think he played against Ohio State, and a lot of times versus Paris Campbell and Terry McLaurin. I mean, he kept up with those guys a lot, and he's really smart, man. He's a veteran. I think he just has a long history of injuries that just kept on with him. He had ankle injuries a few years ago, and the year after that, he still had leg injuries. So I think it's really for him, man, if he stay healthy. I don't really expect too much from him beginning. I think really he's your 5th corner. He's your special team player. It's kind of like a replacement for Justin Bethel, but he's not really going anyone I expect to make an immediate impact. But to me, I think that's a great development talent right there. If you can just keep giving him in, because to me, he's probably one of the better back end talents than what they had when they try to develop a C.J. Goodwin or Akeem King in the late rounds. Jordan Miller, if he stay healthy, maybe if there's Trufant leaves in the earlier and they still have to move up a little bit and they need someone to press on the outside for any injuries, I think he's pretty much, if he get accustomed to real quickly. Plus, Washington corners, I'm not saying they just quickly anybody because every game is the game, but I think they're a little more adjusted, especially when it comes to the passing game, especially deep passing.
Yeah, I don't think you're giving him enough credit. Hot take here, but I wouldn't be shocked if he could beat out Sheffield for the 4th corner spot in camp. I think his ball skills that gives him the edge. I think he's better at the ball, adjusting to the ball, playing with his back to the ball than I think Sheffield is. And I wouldn't be shocked again. When you talked about his injury history, I think that was one of the things that made him fall down the board. Because he's got 4.49 speed. So, it's not like he's slow or anything. He's not 4.2 like Sheffield, but, for a 6'1" corner with 32, 33-inch arms, that's good speed. That's basically what Isaiah Oliver was. The only other thing I'd say about him is, he does need to add, and we talked about it in our article, he does need to add a little bit more weight. He can get overpowered at times at the line. But hey, NFL weight room, strength condition program, that could do wonders for him. So again, I wouldn't be shocked if he battled Sheffield and somehow beat him in camp, because I do think he's a little bit more polished when it comes to the press man than Sheffield is. So I love the pick. I think he's a perfect fit. And again, if he stays healthy and puts on a couple more pounds, he could be a really good long-term starting corner perhaps for the Falcons.
Interesting.
Marcus Green, I haven't got onto him. He was the one surprise. He was kind of like this year Wes Schweitzer. He was kind of like the Tostin. I didn't know him, but see the first highlights, man. Hey, you want to know him. So
yeah, 4 kick return touchdowns in I think 2017, 2018. So again, he's probably the favorite to win that job, and I'm excited to see him with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed because 2 picks after that, Duke Shelley, it was like the pick for Chicago to the 6th round, and that was right there what I wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting with Jordan Miller because what Raekwon was saying was sort of what I felt like. I watched him and I was like, yeah, he's fine. He didn't jump off the tape to me. So I'm eager to sort of dig in deeper with him. My one big concern is sort of the smaller build. It is sort of the struggles in run support. And I wonder if that's going to hinder him potentially sort of leapfrogging a guy like Sheffield, where that's one of the strengths of Sheffield. And particularly if you're going to be a guy that competes in the nickel, you're going to have to be able to bring in run support.
he does need to clean up his tackling. I will say that. I saw him lunging a little bit with his shoulder at times, but
That's a thing that this coaching staff believes they can teach. So it's one of those things where, to them it's not that big a deal because they're like, we can coach that up, and we'll have to sort of see if he does get coached up. It's interesting because with some of the Falcons cornerbacks they've taken in recent years, like Jalen Collins, I thought he was a really good run support corner at LSU, but then the minute he got to Atlanta, he was terrible in run support. And Isaiah Oliver was a guy that I thought was like, he's kind of hit and miss with run support. And I thought that was one of the things that he was most consistent with last season during his rookie season. So it's weird that when we have guys that are like, so if that trend continues, Sheffield's going to miss a whole bunch of tackles this year, and Jordan Miller is going to basically make all his tackles, because it's just weird how these guys in college are the complete opposite when they get to the pros for some reason in Atlanta, at least recently, in my eyes. So, wrapping up the draft class, let's look at some of the undrafted free agents. Was there anybody that sort of the Falcons picked up? They signed 16 guys. Was there anybody that sort of stood out to you guys that you're like, I'm going to try to keep my eye out on this guy heading into training camp, that, you feel like whether you think they're going to potentially challenge for a roster spot or they're just destined for the practice squad, they're certainly going to be the guy that you're necessarily saying, I'm on Leonard Bonnard Hive or whatever the case may be going into the preseason and whatnot.
Raekwon, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I think when Atlanta with the Falcons so thin at corner, I think Jason Stanley out of Georgia, I think there was someone that they really had a lot of interest in when he his pro day and everything. I think he blew up his pro day around like a 4.3, 4.4, somewhere around there, 4.49, jumped like 36 inches in there. They moving him from receiver to corner. So I think that was that's someone I think really to keep an eye on, especially Parker Baldwin. I think they brought him in on a top 30 visit, and we all know that they like the Falcons pretty much go deep in, not just the first half of the draft with top 30 visit, but pretty much the whole line from the 7th round to the undrafted free agent. So I think that was definitely someone they really wanted to hold on to. So maybe between Jason Stanley and Darren Miles out of Boise State, I've seen him a few flashes a little bit watching Boise State this year. I think he was definitely someone that can probably come in, maybe move out to that sound linebacker, or maybe Leo in, but definitely Jason Stanley from Georgia. That's number one on my eyes from the undrafted group.
Yeah, so one of my guys is actually one of them that didn't get signed, and I'm trying to still work to confirm that he got invited to camp. But Tyler Bowling, the left guard from Tulsa, apparently got a camp invite along with his teammate Chandler Miller, who did sign. He's a guy that I had on my eye during the season, came on my radar, went back and watched him. The matchups against Ed Oliver, that was kind of what caught my eye as far as, he held his own and even controlled Oliver at times. So again, we talked about offensive line quite a bit at the top of the show. There are some guys though that, that they signed or that are on the roster that might not be here in 2020. James Carpenter might just be a 1-year insurance rental. Wes Schweitzer's going to hit free agency. So there's an opportunity for Bolin. If he can show the same stuff that he did at Tulsa, I think he can potentially be a sneaky, stash play for 2020 and contend for maybe a backup guard spot or who knows, depending on, how well his game develops. Maybe he's vying for that left guard spot if Lindstrom's locking down the right guard spot. So he's one of the names that signed, that intrigued me right off the bat was Olamide Zaccheaus from Virginia. I forget exactly why. I thought there was something with him with off-field issues that really was the main reason, but a great talent. Pro Football Focus certainly liked him at Virginia in the ACC. And again, I think, there's a spot at the bottom of the depth chart for wide receiver, especially if Marcus Green really is going to be getting the bulk of his snaps at running back, where I think, he can potentially, stick at that wide receiver 6 spot and then maybe take over for Justin Hardy in 2020. So Zaccheaus is one that I'm also going to be watching.
Yeah, Zaccheaus is one of the few guys that I've actually seen on this list, like other than just a couple of highlight clips from some of these guys. Parker Baldwin, the safety from San Diego, is the only guys. So just between those two guys, I'll pick them because I want to reserve judgment and don't want to base too many takes off of just watching, the 6 best plays the guys made on their highlight clips over the last 2 seasons. Zacchaeus is interesting because I think him and Marcus Green are basically the same player, except for Green has more experience as a returner and is probably a lot faster. I don't remember what Zacchaeus ran, but I think it was something like 4.5 or something like that. But like they're very similar players in my eyes. So it'll be interesting to sort of see sort of which one of those guys emerges because Zacchaeus is, probably going to play more as a slot receiver this summer, and which is a more natural fit for him. And Green is going to be trying, presumably to play some running back. So it'll be interesting to sort of see if one of those guys winds up emerging. And I thought Baldwin was a decent option as sort of a single high sort of safety that could potentially land a practice squad spot and be a guy that maybe could impact on special teams. So he's a guy I got my eye on. But, some of these other guys, at least the blurbs I've read, a couple of highlights I've seen, other people that have noted some of these guys and given some of them draftable grades, makes me intrigued that, over the next couple of weeks, after I get through the Falcons main rookie class to sort of get into some of these undrafted free agents to really sort of be like, okay, this guy's got something, and I don't know if there's that many roster spots really available for any of these guys to make, but certainly I think they can, really challenge and wind up being practice squad players. And one of the complaints I had about last year was I thought a lot of the guys the Falcons had on the practice squad were just pretty meh players. I just think they were just keeping guys just to sort of have for the scout team because they needed a body for the scout team and not guys that were really developmental options. So I'm hoping that this summer some of these guys will wind up being legit guys that could be developed into the back-end roster players down the road. All right, we got a few more minutes left of the show, so let's try to answer these mailbag questions. Haig at Engage Haig. His question is, who do you think had the best draft in the NFC South?
I think all four teams kind of had, so-so or, certain aspects of the draft, they improved their teams. But I'll give the edge to the Carolina Panthers. I think, getting a player that I had hoped the Falcons wouldn't pass on, but eventually did, and Brian Burns, I think he's going to be a stud pass rusher. And, you hope he's not going to turn into a Pro Bowler because he's on a division rival. But I do think he has that Pro Bowl potential. And certainly they needed to get younger there. And then, double dipping at that spot and getting Christian Miller later in round 4, I think that was great value. So they certainly helped out their pass rush, which makes the Falcons selections even more important to help protect Matt Ryan in that regard. And then I think also Greg Little, while he does have his deficiencies, I think at least in the run game's concern, I do think he does have a solid baseline level talent as a pass rusher where they can build off of that. And he might end up being their blindside protector of the future, which, if they can get those three things, improving the pass rush and then, adding their left tackle of the future, I think they probably help themselves the most. So I'll go with the Panthers.
Yeah, I was thinking Panthers a little bit. I think everybody in the NFC, we kind of more of the front end of the draft from the round 1 through 3. Everybody kind of like hit the same value. But I think maybe the Saints, when they got Chauncey Gardner, I think that would kind of like took them over, especially in the 4th round. But Tampa Bay to me kind of like hit it on all ends. They got Devin White. I think they was probably like the best linebacker besides Devin. I mean, not Devin White. I'm sorry, it is Devin White. Besides Devin Bush. Besides Devin Bush from Michigan, and Deshaun Bunner from 1 and 2, I think that was the best 2 values right there. But Jamal Dean, I didn't know if anybody was going to get him in the 3rd round, but I think after this combine, they got him, and I think that was really good value. I really liked him, especially when he had a couple of his games versus Alabama, and I think it was Georgia. He had a few nice plays in there. Mike Edwards in the end of the 3rd round, too. That was another great pick that they got. I think that's a safety, interchangeable guy, nickel, that I thought the Falcons maybe could pick up on day 3. And Anthony Nelson, they got him again, a big guy from Iowa, defensive end. I didn't really like him in an even front, but maybe he works out there. And I really don't. Of course, you don't want him to turn out good or anything, but really, what kind of puts me over the edge was they probably got the best player out of everybody at the end of the draft. That was Terry Beckner. I think because his injury history, I think a lot of teams are scared away. But I think that was probably like the best player you can kind of get in the 7th round with that value. To me, he's somehow probably a good role player being 2-3 technique, but I definitely go with Tampa Bay on this one.
Yeah, just to make it a clean sweep for the NFC South, since you guys talked about Carolina and Tampa Bay, I guess I'll talk about the Saints. I think considering the Saints only had 4 picks or whatever they wound up ending with, They got a lot of bang for their buck. They got a potential starting center for years to come. And, I don't know if Falcon fans would agree with this. I don't know if I would agree with this. But I think some people probably think Eric McCoy is a better interior offensive lineman than Chris Lindstrom was. At least based off of some mocks that you saw out there that saw Eric McCoy potentially being, leapfrogging a guy like Garrett Bradbury as far as the top center in this draft class in round one. And sort of to get Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, another guy that a lot of people thought was a first-round talent, certainly a top 50 talent, that fell, due to character concerns, and gives them another versatile option in their secondary that can play in the slot, that can play some single high and whatnot, to add to their secondary makes a lot of sense. I'll be honest with you, I've seen a lot of Saquon Hampton. I've seen only a little bit of Alizé Mack, and, I was impressed with him. So I feel like, out of 5 picks, you're not necessarily going to, revamp your team. But in terms of, nailing with those top 2 picks, nailing it and getting guys that can step on the field right away and help out your team, I think the Saints did a pretty good job. So kudos to them. Unfortunately, it's not going to necessarily work when they play the Falcons this year. But let's move on to Haig's next question. After the draft, what do you think are the 5 positions of need for the Falcons / where are they weakest at?
I wouldn't go as far as saying there's 5 positions of need left. I think really still it's just the defensive line. And I'd throw in depth at linebacker, which is why, when I was talking about the Allison pick, I was hoping there's a couple good linebackers. Mac Wilson was even on the board too, which surprised to see him fall all the way to round 5. But that's kind of where I would focus my attention if, I'm looking to add someone in free agency. Would be along the defensive line or the linebacking core. Because, again, I think if you do have an injury to Deion Jones again, God forbid, in 2019, you're kind of at that same spot you were in 2018 where they didn't really improve at all. You're going to just kind of count Foy Olakun, I guess, at that point improving, which, I'm certainly expecting to happen. But still, I'd be concerned if we were to go down one of our top 3 linebackers. So I'd say linebacker and defensive line, particularly edge, because I think, as I said at the top of the show, I think they're pretty comfortable and set with their top 4 interior guys, but there's some question marks, and you can always improve, Steven Means, upgrade at that 4th edge spot.
Yeah, I agree with Matt. I think the linebacker was kind of like one of the positions. I was a little disappointed when they didn't draft one because I thought that eventually, sooner or later, they had to get another replacement. Or if Devondre Campbell was a lead for free agency, someone to sign back. That's why I thought Jamal Davis would be a perfect pick instead of the Quadra Allison pick, but it happened. But I think that right now we kind of got to the point where now I think Duke Riley is strictly for special team purposes at this point, and Foye has stepped in, but still we don't want to put too much on him at this moment. But besides him, I mean, we don't really have too much depth at that end. So I think it was a little weird not to see too much investment into linebacker. We've seen them re-sign Kamal and bring back Bruce Carter, and I've seen those guys. They pretty much put the trust in those 2 guys to be the veteran back ends. But we can't really say that they're the quality starter we want to be inside there if something was to happen, as they make something up. So we did see them get. I did like that they got Trey Crawford out when I think really like him when he was coming out. I think at UAB, but besides that, I mean, it was kind of like a little weak in between what's going on as linebacker. I think maybe you could say offensive line again because we still don't know what's going on there. I mean, I still would say that we're a little in the dark of what's going to happen on the right side, but I think linebacker is probably the only biggest need on the team.
Yeah, if I was to pick 5 positions that I have the biggest question marks at going into training camp, and it doesn't necessarily think that the Falcons are weak. I just have questions. I'm not necessarily convinced that the guys that the Falcons have sort of penciled in at those positions currently are necessarily going to get it done. And, obviously the defensive line, both defensive end, defensive tackle, obviously I think that steps up. I agree with you guys at linebacker. I feel like sort of the depth behind Devondre Campbell is a little thin. Obviously, Bruce Carter can play that spot. Obviously, Kamal Ishmael can play that spot. But I don't necessarily know if the Falcons want to get into that boat again of sort of having to move around their linebackers to sort of deal with injuries and sort of having another guy there that, has some experience or at least has some upside that you can develop if they wound up pulling the trigger on the draft pick, I think is valuable. I still have questions about the backup free safety. I know we have Casey there. but I want to keep him at cornerback. I want to see what he can do at corner. And, I don't know if J.J. Wilcox is really the option there. I don't know if Afo Laguda is really the option there. So I still have questions at that backup free safety spot. And then the last spot is the backup center position. We're going to have Wes Schweitzer compete there. Can he do it? Maybe. We've only really seen one preseason game of Wes Schweitzer playing center. It didn't necessarily go great. It didn't go that poorly either, but it's just one of those things where in the event of Alex Mack going down with an injury, I don't know right now if we have a viable option currently on the roster to sort of fill in. I don't necessarily trust Adam Geddes to get the job done if Wes Schweitzer's not up for task. So if the Falcons were to go out and sign another sort of veteran that is truly a center as opposed to a guard that can play center, I think that makes a lot of sense, moving forward if they can sort of pick up that guy either before camp or after camp. So those are the 5 positions that I have the biggest question marks currently right now at this point in the calendar. All right, last question. Saqib Sharif at QIBZS on Twitter asks, when in the actual expletive deleted are we going to get a pass rush?
Probably never. I've been a fan of this team since 2002, and I think maybe those first couple years they sort of had one, but since then it's been bupkis. When we least expect it, it'll probably come, but we shouldn't expect it anytime soon.
So this year, it's going to come?
Yeah, maybe. Set the bar low. Set the bar low,
We're asking for way too much right now. All right. Right now, we literally just got someone to take, man. We're asking for way too much right now, okay? I think that's something that we just got to let it go. We got Takk McKinley and Vic Beasley in the first round. They're not going to let go of this plan. No. I don't care how bad it goes. It's kind of like San Francisco. They're not going to stop drafting defensive linemen. We're not going to let go. It's kind of like Bobby Cox with the Braves. Just ride it till the wheels fall off. When the wheels fall off, we'll make it there eventually. But right now, I think it's really pretty much an improvement. They just bet on improvement from Takk and Vic, and maybe they still get some between Stephen Means and Adrian Claiborne, which I really think is more pressure than sacks. But hey, whatever, just disrupt the quarterbacks and make us better and win games.
Look, I think they will get improvement from the pass rush this year. I don't know if it's going to be enough improvement to satisfy all of us, but I do think Claiborne is going to bring something to the table. I do think Takk is going to make the leap. I'm crossing my fingers that Takk is, because if you look at the half of the season where he really did play well, the early portion of the season and the way he ended it, Takk was, statistically, at least if you look at like Pro Football Focus metrics, he was like a top 10 pass rusher for like 8 games last year. Then the problem was for the other 7 games he played, he was like barely a top 50 pass rusher, or probably not even top 100 pass rusher. So it just kind of disappeared. And so you just got to get rid of those games where he disappears. Like we see games where. What were you saying?
How many sacks this year did Vic Beasley has to have to us to say that he's coming back after this year? What type of year does Vic Beasley?
It's not even like you said it earlier. It's not even about sacks. It's about pressures for him, because he had the sacks that one year, but he didn't have the pressures, and it just wasn't sustainable. So we need to see him making an impact consistently. Like I need to see what are the top sack pressure guys to like 60, 70 pressures in a season, right?
Well, Khalil Mack and Von Miller get a little bit more than that, but 60, 70 would be considered good. Very good.
Yeah, like if he hits 50 and gets close to 60, maybe we'll talk. But again, I don't think.
Let's hit 40 first.
Yeah.
You're not wrong. Had 40 since 2016.
You're not wrong. Yeah.
So, look, I don't think there's anything Vic Beasley really do to come back this year. Even if he has a great season, it's just basically like, well, he had a great season. He's going to make a lot of more money than the Falcons are going to want to pay him on the open market, and we'll get a 3rd round pick for him. If he doesn't have a great season, then the Falcons will be like, well, we can do better than this on the open market or in the draft, and they'll let him walk. So I really think weird stuff is going to have to happen in order for Vic Beasley to be back next season. And so my hope is that the Falcons will get improvement from some of the key guys this year, and they'll be better as a pass rush. They're not going to be good, or at least I'm not expecting them to. They'll be better. There'll be games, particularly against Houston, where they will, be lights out because Houston's offensive line is terrible, and still is terrible. and they'll feast on those guys, and we'll be like, oh yeah, this unit's really good, and then they'll do absolutely nothing against the Saints as they usually do, and it'll be whatever. And next offseason, then they can do the all-in blitz on upgrading defensive line that they did on the offensive line. That's my hope. I've literally been waiting for that plan to happen for like 12 years. So, it tells you what, best laid plans or whatever. You can always dream. The mantra of being a Falcon fan for as long as I have been is there's always next year. So that's basically what it is with the pass rush. Like next year, they're going to get Chase Young. That's the dream, or whatever the case may be, or whoever is the top pass rusher next year. Like that'll be the guy they'll get, and they'll save their franchise. But it's probably not going to happen. But this is what I have to tell myself each and every year, each and every offseason, in order to keep rooting for this team and not pull out all my hair, but starting here to finish the job that already started up here. So there you have it, guys. Appreciate Raekwon for joining us on the show.
Yeah, Raekwon.
Oh man, no problem. I was cool talking to you guys.
Go ahead and plug sort of where people can chat you up on Twitter and whatnot.
Hey man, you guys can always catch me on Twitter on RxGilbert97 on Twitter anytime. I just got teamed up with Matt. I'm starting to write on with him. His guys at Rise Up Reader. You guys can catch me on anywhere. There's also catch some real cool content this year, especially in the summer. It's a lot of different things going down. Everyone's kind of simmered down this year, but this summer you can expect a lot of different content, especially when it comes to incoming and running training camp from different guys this year for me. So just expect hear my name a whole lot.
There you have it. So check out Raekwon there, and of course you guys can check us out sometime. I don't, we'll probably be back. We'll figure out when we're going to come back now that the draft is over, and all the buildup has led to whatever we just did on tonight's episode. Not to say it was disappointing or anything, but we spent a lot of time talking about the draft, and I don't know if it lived up to y'all's expectations, but it certainly met mine because I had very low expectations for what the Falcons were going to do. But, when we do come back, you guys can, of course, submit questions to the mailbag using the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. Of course, you can tweet at the show at FalconsPFC, or you can tweet at myself. I'm at FalcFans. Matt is at Matt Karoly, Karoly. Of course, follow the show in Pro Football Central on Twitter as well when we do the simulcast on Periscope at PF Central. Check out ProFootballCentral.com. Subscribe to Pro Football Central on YouTube. Hit that bell icon when you do so that you know when we go live. And, of course, like us on Facebook at Falcon Central Radio as well. So we appreciate all you guys joining us tonight. And we'll certainly be back at various points in May. I don't know if we're necessarily going to come back on next Tuesday because I don't know if there's anything specifically. But Matt and I will certainly discuss it behind the scenes, and we'll let you guys know. And you can find all the updates at those various places I plugged. So appreciate you guys tuning in tonight.